We are about to have a presentation by Aaron Fornarino about BPD and men, called The Elephant in the Room. And Aaron works as a taxation officer for the South Australian Government and has studies as a Bachelor of Law degree part-time. Aaron was diagnosed with BPD in 1994 and has lived experience for over 24 years. And he's a dedicated dad, a passionate advocate, and particularly passionate about assisting others with a diagnosis of BPD. Can we welcome Aaron, please?
Hello everyone, well, my name's Aaron. As just mentioned, I work as a taxation officer, but I also study law part-time. It's quite a challenging and enduring degree. I've actually had to take some time personally off because just a bit too much pressure. Just going on to why I got involved in this sort of advocacy role. I was very interested in BPD. I've always been interested in it, but a few years ago I saw a lack of interest in BPD in men. And this isn't really a competition, so I'm not going to harp on too much about that, but BPD does affect men, and they're probably quite underdiagnosed. Rather, there's an often 75 to 25 ratio that you'd hear that women are more predominant, but it's possibly false, those statistics. It's hard to explain, but with men tend to be a bit more introverted with their emotions. I think men are taught in ways to hide their emotions, whereas women are more likely to go and seek help and treatment and support. So after experiencing a lot of the stigma that I had throughout the years, I'd had long periods of hospitalisation and judgments from the mental health profession. I decided I wanted to do something a bit more than just sit on the sidelines and watch men suffer in silence, I guess. So, a bit about me and my childhood. I grew up in South Australia, a little town called Hope Valley. It's an outer suburb. My parents got divorced when I was about, 11 or 12. And I took that very hard. That was quite traumatic for me and my brother and sister at the time. Naturally, being a male, I wanted to live with my dad. He was my role model. Okay, he wasn't the greatest of dads, but he did his best. And I went to go live with him. My schooling was a bit awkward in the sense that I was a very shy child and was quite emotional at a very early age. Things like going to make a payment at the counter for a school trip or something, it'd make me cringe and I'd get really upset and distressed over the thought of it. Making friends was really difficult as well, so I couldn't really relate to other children. I didn't see what other kids saw in certain types of activities, like sport. I hated sport, couldn't stand it. I was more of a musical person that developed a habit for the guitar when I turned about 13, which was ironically when a lot of my symptoms started to flare up. The first time I self-harmed, I saw a psychiatrist. I was actually picked up through a quiz at school that we did. It was supposed to be confidential, but they made it so, they coded it so they could determine who you were. So I saw a counsellor who recommended me to a psychiatrist, Graham Martin. He actually lives in Brisbane. I did invite him, but he was a bit unwell, so he couldn't attend. But he diagnosed me with dysthymia to start with, which is like an ongoing type depressive illness. After that short stint in hospital, my behaviours became a lot worse. I honestly can't say what triggered them that way, but I was self-harming a lot. Medications I was introduced to were having a very detrimental effect on my well-being and stability. So from the point of about 13 onwards, life got a lot harder for me. My parents didn't understand what was going on. This was in the mid-90s, and there wasn't a lot of information about borderline personality disorder. I was told a lot of it was attention-seeking behaviour and manipulative. A lot of what you've heard today I can identify with in that way. So I went through a merry-go-round of hospital admissions, different medications, different types of therapies. None of them really worked. The medications I'll be careful with, because what didn't work for me may work for someone else. So if you're taking medication, please keep taking it. It just never worked for me. I've had a couple of serious suicide attempts in my lifetime. I've come quite close. And I was a former ward of the state, so what that means is my parents took me to court when I was 15. My behaviour was that challenging that they had to relinquish their care. So I was placed in government residential facilities for kids with all sorts of problems. Not mental health, it was more of like aggressive type problems, which was just confusing. And I'll never forget the first night I went to one of these facilities. A girl had literally overdosed on inhaling glue and was convulsing. And I'll never get that mental imagery out of my head. It was really confronting as a 15-year-old to see that sort of thing. With those places, I feel I went in and came out a lot worse. A lot of those places were poorly staffed. There was no structure or routine. They tried to, but you're mixing a bunch of kids with all sorts of different range of issues, child abuse issues, parental issues, who had no one to care for them. And when you put those sorts of kids together, it's just asking for trouble. It's not helpful. It was one of the most saddening points in my life that I look back on and go, I can't believe I survived living in that environment. It was really difficult. Ironically, it was quite interesting to see from when I hit 18 that the state care system would see you. That was pretty much it. I was out the door. I'd found rental accommodation with a mental health unit in Eastern Adelaide, and I'd stayed there for probably about a year or two. But just before my 18th birthday, I was told I had borderline personality disorder. I was told that my relationships would be poor, that I wouldn't be able to work, that my life would be quite problematic and a roller coaster. And I felt that was really crushing, being at that age and being told that you're stuck with this untreatable illness for the rest of your life. And I always felt there was a bit more to it than just what was being called attention-seeking and manipulative behaviour. It's like that psychiatrists, my parents, friends, whatever, they thought I could switch my behaviours on and off at will, and it didn't work like that at all. There were certain triggers through stressful events and periods in my life where I look back and go, hang on, that makes sense. That's why I reacted like that. But of course, in hindsight, it didn't really benefit me at the time. So I left that mental health accommodation. One time I just decided I wanted to move to Perth. That makes no sense whatsoever. But with $5 to my name, I moved to Perth for 2 years and I lived over there. I came back to Adelaide for a short period and then moved to Melbourne. It's my first time in Brisbane. I'm really impressed with the sunshine. I think it's fantastic. I've got blisters on my feet from wearing poor shoes, walking around, so it's quite painful. I kept trying to run away from my problems, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It didn't really help in the sense that I was always stuck with this inner dread, this feeling that was just eating at me that something wasn't quite right and something wasn't wrong. And the fact that medication didn't seem to help just made it worse. I wanted something that would fix it to make my feelings disappear. Because of that time, I think we're probably in just over 2002, when I'd got back to Adelaide after living around for a bit. I started to try and seek help again, but there was just nothing there. I had psychiatrists tell me it was their mission to make sure I was not admitted to hospital because it didn't do me any good. While I see that now as being beneficial, I became very addicted to hospital. It was a safe place. I had no worries. I got to meet kids with really bad problems who we got along with because we could relate. Some of those kids had depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, but I found I could bond with people very easily. And a lot of these wards that I was in, I was transitioning between childhood wards earlier on to adult units at a very early age. So it was a very eye-opening experience to live with. And I guess I'm grateful because I have a very big tolerance towards mental health and to others who are going through issues and can relate quite easily. My turning point was when I turned 26. I was arrested for an offence which I'm not going to disclose, but suffice to say it woke me up a lot in saying, hey, I've got a really bad problem here, I need to do something about it. Something's not right in my life. I'm sick of living like this. I'm sick of the medication, the revolving door of admissions, being told I couldn't work. So one day I decided to apply for a job in retail at Coles. I worked very hard. I took my job seriously, and what I liked about working is when I was working, I didn't have time to think or reflect on my issues or problems. I was focused solely on work. And I still use that today. I've been in state taxation for 6 years now, and it works. Going to work, just something as simple as that. It takes my mind off things. I can unwind and focus on a job. I commenced DBT in 2010, so all the court stuff had gone through. I've been sentenced. I didn't spend. I was lucky I received a suspended sentence. I'd received mental health treatment from the court. They accepted that there was an issue and you go through this program and whatnot. But DBT wasn't around that early on. But nevertheless, I enrolled in DBT in 2010 and completed the course successfully. In 2008, though, I had a daughter. I have a daughter, I should say. Her name's Violet. She's 9. She's a very happy child, and it makes me proud to be a father. It changed certain aspects, and this is not trying to sound selfish, but all of my focus was going into my daughter and trying to ensure that the mistakes that were made with me didn't happen with her. So I try to be the best parent I can, and I make mistakes. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I think every parent makes mistakes. But the intention is there to provide the best we can for our children. So my problem with alcohol developed probably in about 2012. What I used to do is I used to go out and drink in the city. I liked how alcohol made me feel because it cut off my emotions. It gave me a break for about 3 to 4 hours. What I didn't realise at the time was it made me feel great for 3 or 4 hours, but it took about another, 3, 4 days and I was feeling like absolute rubbish. So I made a decision in about 2015 that I was not going to drink in the city anymore because disorderly behaviour is a really silly charge for what it's worth, but nevertheless, I'd had several disorderly behaviour charges accumulate over time, and I went, I'm not going to drink in the city anymore. Every time I drank in the city, I'd have an issue. I'd be calling for help or something would happen and I'd be in trouble. And ever since I did that, I haven't had an issue with alcohol. I choose to drink at home occasionally, but I don't. It's not a habit anymore. I don't drink for the wrong reasons. So it was interesting today to hear a lot of different perspectives, especially from women, and being able to compare to their experiences, because a lot of the issues with stigma and trauma in hospital and general niggly commentary I can relate to very strongly. And I find it quite sad that we live in a society where men are taught to hide from their feelings and just toughen up or get over it, that sort of approach. It's not helpful. So what I decided to do is I joined the BPD Foundation in South Australia, and I wanted to do some advocacy work. I wanted to help others who were going through similar type problems. and design solutions rather than just getting on with my life, even if that does sound selfish. I just wanted to help others. I think there's a big gap in support and help for people with BPD. There's a few notes about different services that have come to light since I was a teenager, which I wish I'd had when I was a teenager. Facebook, for one. A lot of people don't see. Facebook can be seen as a narcissistic tool, which is fine. I guess to a degree sometimes it can be, but there are community groups that are set up for people with BPD on Facebook, and there are rules set. So it's not like one big whiny session of everyone's problems. It's not at all, it's not that. People do chat and support each other on these forums, and there's many of them. I've seen so many instances of someone else lifting someone else up, and that's supportive. I think if someone with BPD can't talk to their parents or doesn't want to talk to a therapist, if they've got the opportunity to jump online, then they can seek support that way. It's an alternate option if nothing else is working. With my mental health, I know what works and what doesn't work for me personally, but it's different for everyone. BPD is a very individual illness in the sense that psychiatry, and I'm not bagging psychiatry, but psychiatry seems to like to herd people. If you can be treated, if a certain pill can work, take it, see you later, you come back when you need some more. With BPD though, because it's so individual, it's not, you can present with a particular set of symptoms, but it can be all over the place and not any one individual is the same as another. That frightens psychiatry, I think, and which may be a reason why such a reluctance to treat it or to get help. With growing up with BPD, it's been interesting to see the set of changes over the last few years. There's a lot more focus now on DBT and recovery and treatment than there were, say, a decade ago when I was growing up. It was really difficult to get through a lot of that stuff, but I was probably categorised in the worst possible scenario you could think of with BPD. My self-harm was out of control for a very long time. And it wasn't until I hit about, 26, 27 when I just stopped. I could see it was damaging my behaviour. And because of my new role as a dad, I didn't want my daughter asking me, "Daddy, what are those marks on your arms?" I mean, she's going to see them one day and ask probably, and I'll have to explain it to her when she's older, but I've made certain choices in my life that I'm not proud of, that I do the best that I can now to make up for them. That's really important to me. So what works is listening. Listen to someone with BPD. I've heard that as a recurrent theme throughout this entire event. Listening really helps, validating what someone's saying instead of brushing it off, saying, "I'll just get over it, you'll be fine, you'll get better." Talking helps, but knowing your place as well. Patience is a huge issue with BPD. A lot of the time you'll see someone with BPD take 10 steps forward and then probably 20 steps back and then 10 steps forward and 10 steps back, but they get there eventually. It's just difficult. There's a lot of regression when I was younger of acceptance. I wanted to have schizophrenia and bipolar because they made sense. I'd read all these texts on bipolar and schizophrenia and was convinced that I heard voices in my head, and that wasn't the case at all. I just wasn't accepting what I'd been diagnosed with. What doesn't work is negative attitudes, stigma, negative commentary. Often you'll hear negative commentary, especially in emergency departments, with nurses who aren't trained to deal with people who are presenting with suicidal ideation or wanting to seek help, which ironically makes the person who's presenting want to leave. That's just not my idea of a healthcare system. When someone presents like that, there's certain circumstances that need to be taken into consideration, like where are we going to treat this patient? Are we going to talk about all their personal problems out in an open ward? Like, I've had that happen so many times where my personal information or what I'm going through has been yelled quite loudly. That's made me escalate and made things worse, and I've had to be sedated. It's embarrassing. Brushing things off really doesn't help, or using that get out of it mentality. It's more of a person with BPD doesn't have the tools necessary to ensure they can incorporate coping mechanisms appropriately. That's really tricky, and it takes time, and again, patience is a huge thing. So I've noticed with Marley's speech and a few others discussing media representation of BPD in the community, a lot of it's quite awkward and distressing. I've noticed within the last few years, the only time you hear about BPD in the news is if there's been some sort of horrible crime and a lawyer's tried to argue in court that their client was suffering with BPD. I think there's more of a role in media organisations to portray BPD in not such a stigma-ridden way. It really does nothing except distort community expectations of mental health in general, not just BPD, but depression and anxiety. Because you've got these people out there in the community who think if someone commits a horrible crime, they're just going to get let off if they plead a mental health issue. That's not true. And mental health forensic settings are no fun either. That's what I don't think the community understands at times is if you were told you can either go to a forensic mental health unit or go to a general population in a normal prison, what would you pick? I wouldn't pick a forensic mental health unit. I've known people who've worked in them and yeah, they're not very nice places. It was great today to see so much hope and inspiration in hearing everyone's perspectives. I think men need to come forward a bit more with BPD and not be afraid to speak their mind and emotion. I think men can have a tendency to abuse substances maybe a little more because of stress and pressures in everyday life. And the unfortunate thing with BPD is you really can't treat BPD until you treat drug and alcohol issues. I've had my fair share of problems with alcohol, but I've got myself to a stage now where I feel confident in going out, and if I want to have a drink, I can without going silly. Well, not silly as much, but relapsing. I haven't presented to hospital for quite a while. I'd credit DBT to that. It taught me coping mechanisms and just simple things like avoiding going out if I really don't have to. I've still got a limited amount of friends. Like I value quality over quantity in friendships, and I think that's really important. People with BPD can tend to compare to one another, so the last thing I want to give from this talk is you to go out and say to your son or daughter, why can't you be like him? Why can't you get a stable job? That's not helpful and that's not realistic. Everyone's got their own time with how they recover and how they get through and manage appropriately. So I'd just say stay hopeful. It does get better. It takes time. It can be really frustrating at points, especially with self-harm. It's very distressing, very confronting to find out your son or daughter is self-harming. But there are treatment options now. It's a pity that there's still stigma is still around, but I think there have been a lot more better developments, particularly with depression and anxiety and the Beyond Blue initiative. I'd hope to see a national level equivalent to personality disorders, or at least BPD, because I think that's important. People should be encouraged to want to seek treatment, not sit in their room and fear the worst, or not have a tendency to rely on medication that at times can dull your thinking. But medication does work for some, it just didn't work for me. So I might leave it for now. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We do have a few moments for questions. Should anyone want to ask a question?
Okay. Aaron, you're working with, how many blokes are you working with in South Australia? Like, what's your day-to-day interaction with other men? Is it common? Is it you've one every now and then?
Every now and then, yeah. I don't really, with my workplace, because your role's so focused on a particular area, you don't really have interaction. I mean, you talk to people, of course. That's part of a work environment. But in terms of like catching up after work, I don't really do that. Unless I need help with a task at work, I don't really speak to many people. I try to make effort. I do try to go above and beyond at times, because if I'm sitting by myself day after day not saying a word, then it looks a bit sus.
Are you someone, I often get this levelled at me, is that I get on better with females than I do with males.
Oh, I agree. I'm the same.
Yeah.
I'm the same. I have a partner in Adelaide, Nicole. She's my rock. She's supported me so much over the last 4 years. She makes me proud at how far I've come. And it's really tricky when I do have a tendency to relate to women more. And that can be confronting sometimes in a relationship sense. But at the end of the day, I reiterate how long I've been with Nicole for to her. I've been with you for 4 years. I'm not going elsewhere. You've got me to stay.
I just want to make a comment about how your face lit up when you talked about your daughter.
Thank you.
It's so touching.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Carolyn from DBT Brisbane, and I'm working with a few men with BPD at the moment. I'm just interested in what you found useful with DBT in terms of anger specifically, because as a woman treating men, I guess that sort of would be something I'd be interested in hearing about.
I guess with anger, I always thought, I grew up to believe you couldn't get angry. You weren't allowed to get angry. Getting angry was bad, it was volatile, it was horrible. What I didn't learn was it's how you express your anger that counts. You can get angry as all you want. You can scream into a pillow, but verbalising it or directing it at others, that's inappropriate and it's not helpful. That took a long time to learn, as simple as it sounds. And I think, just to go off topic for a minute, I think what some people don't understand is many with BPD don't have very specific skills to cope with stress, or something that may seem simple to someone in general. It's not necessarily simple to someone with BPD. And you also have an issue with someone with BPD feeling stupid because someone's challenged them on something that should be obvious, and they may get it afterwards, but you have this horrible sense of, well, why didn't I know that before? But with anger in particular, I think there's ways and outlets that you can use to reduce your anger and identify it to the point before you explode. That's really important.
Thank you, Aaron. I personally think it takes a huge courage to get up and share your story, whatever gender you are. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Can we thank Aaron together, please?